hit that, it will first select everything. Oh, hold on one sec. All right. It will first select everything, but then if we just go back to here, hit A a few times. Oh, the screencast key's not working this one? Okay, well, I'll just try and call everything out. So, we selected this vertex here. Now what we do, if we hit numpad period on here, we can see that that vertex is right there because we never unwrapped these, it just kind of squashed both of these. So let's look at UV unwrapping these. So let's go into edge mode, select, and let's maybe cut that there and see what that does. Now if we do Control E, mark seam, select everything, and unwrap, suddenly that seems to have really improved that. So that's what you got to kind of look at for that, and then you can kind of see what happened over here. So essentially when we made that one little cut there, it took this and separated into 4 beautiful little planks. So it's wrapping that directly around that. So that's really much all we have to do for those 2 little things. That was an easy fix, but as you can see, there's a lot more to go. So first we, here, and then hit the numpad period, and you can see this here. And that would be because we're trying to squash this entire thing here into one little point. So what we need to do is go into edge select and just shift all our way around. And you can see it selects the same thing here. You can see how that just got completely squashed. And then we're going to do Control E, mark seam, and then same thing here, Control E, mark seam, and then we're going to do an unwrap here. And we've made some progress. Let's go over and deselect that, and then we're just going to take a look at our islands here. Ah, there we go. Okay. So as you can see, we have one island here, but we want to make sure that these are nicely proportioned, and there's a few ways we can do it. The first thing we want to do is go into display, and under advanced we need stretch. We want to see if these are being stretched because that's always a big problem. So if we look here, we can see the dark blue means we're good. No stretching really, no problems. However, this means very stretched, and that means very stretched. That's fairly stretched there as well. So we need to fix that. Stretching essentially means that anything you put, any picture you put on there will be distorted because it's stretching it and cranking it in directions it doesn't want to go. So the first thing to locate that, we sync up our mesh and everything again. We go into face select, and then we select it, and then let's scoot that over, and then we hit the period key. And we can see immediately what our problem is. We have this corner here. Everything here is kind of getting stretched here. So this is the main stretch point right here. So what we want to do, so we're just going to cut this entire piece off. Since the player would hardly ever see that, it's on a downside, underside edge, we have no problem at all cutting this off entirely. So we can hit Control E, mark seam, and while we're at it, let's just take a look at this first. Let's go that and hit the numpad period key, and that is actually an interior face that we don't need, I think. Yeah, so it's Control X and then face, and we definitely don't need that. So let's go back over to here, see if we can select that in there, and delete that face as well. Now we can go to UV unwrap, move this over, and as you can see, all blue minor stretching in here, not that worried about it. So the other thing is space. You want to utilize as much space as possible. And yes, UVs are always the worst. UVs are artistic, essentially. You really need to kind of know what looks good, what doesn't, and how to effectively cut it into as many pieces or as little pieces as possible, while retaining as much of the texture space as possible. So what you have here, you have a UV texture that goes from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, and you want to maximize the space. Remember, the larger these pieces are, the more detail they hold. So if they're smaller, they don't hold as much detail. So you want as large as possible. However, if you just go here and start, let's desync that. Select everything. We'll go in by things here. So this is going to be our top, and we can tell because remember when we split up the edges there, this is what happens. It kind of splits it out and flattens it out, makes it easier to put a 2D texture on. And those we need to have a lot of detail. And so if you kind of look at this, you can say, well, I can, G, rotate, and I'm just going to see if screencast keys got shut off or if they don't work in these different things here. I don't think they work. I'll try and call up my keys as much as possible. It looks like it's only working in the different workspace window, in the layout workspace window. But this actually works fairly similar to the regular thing. You use G to move and R to rotate. So, but if you start going in here and scaling the small things up to large like this, then you have UV scaling issues, which may or may not be a problem. It depends on how you do it. But let's say you have this part, this thing here is scaled much larger than this thing here. The user or the player is going to expect them to look kind of the same, but this might look, the texture on this, like the wood grain, let's say the wood grain would look massive on this, but tiny, or other way around technically, if you scaled this up, it would look tiny on this, but massive on this, and maybe a little blurry and out of focus. So you want to maintain the same amount of scaling so that your model looks correct. Now, like I said, if you think the player's pretty much never going to see it, you could take this face and this face and just completely scale them down to make them they'd be very large and kind of grainy and blurry in your UV texture. But if the player's never going to see it, not really a problem, or very unlikely to see it, not that much of a problem. So you got to think about all of these things in concert. So let's just go ahead and unwrap this again. As you can see, I don't like this because it's not using enough of the texture space. So you can hit Control P. Does it not work that way? I wonder if they changed it. I think they changed, I don't know what the shortcut key is now, but it's pack islands, and you can basically run this as much as you want, and it will kind of cycle through between a few different ways of packing your islands. And it should, if we pull up the options, it should have a margin. You do not ever want overlap on your UVs. That's another big problem. If you have overlap on your UVs, you're going to start everything when you texture paint it, it's going to be painting the same texture on two different things, which is definitely not what you want. So we've run a pack on here a couple of times now, and we found something that works. Now, let me see, it's already, okay, I'm going to try and hurry this up, guys, but basically what we've done is pack everything and allow us to fit the most amount of texture or the most amount of texture detail in one space. Now, we're going to have problems with this in the future, and I'll show you guys the problem and kind of how to cover it in the future. But for now, the next thing you always want to do is you want to add a new texture on here, and it's going to be a color grid, and hit OK. And we can go back into display and turn off stretch, we don't really need that. And this is going to just kind of display that on your model. Now, in Blender 2.79, this was easy to do. You just change it to Blender Render and go into Textured Viewport, and it would show the texture on there. However, Blender Render has been removed from the render engines in 2.8. So what we would need to do is go into, where is that? Materials. And this has a material on it, and we're going to go to the base color. Let's say you didn't have a material on it. Okay, let's just say we're going to add a material, hit new material, and we're going to go to base color. We're going to select image texture, and we're going to select, it should be untitled. You could have named it, but we're going to go there and select that. And then I believe we go into material, yeah, this view here. And I don't know how to get this unlit, but because I think it's lit by this actual light, so not great. But next we're going to go here and hit tab, and then you can see kind of everything. And I don't like this because notice how this is not square. Like you see how these are stretched, right? If everything was correct, it would be looking completely square and more like this, you know, natural. The nice part is about this, at least since we made those cuts there, when we move this around, you can see that all of them are like this. This A follows directly onto this side here. But as you can see, the scaling was not correct. And now, if we were paying attention, we may have, oh, they changed it. It would have been in the bottom here. But if we go here, if there's a scaling problem, always check to make sure that your scale is correct. If you have a non-uniform scale when doing it, you can come up with these weird scaling issues. So what you want to do is hit Control A and then apply the scale. And then that will make sure the scale is always at 1. And then you can go back and UV unwrap everything. And now you can see that everything looks, you know, nice and square. This looks a lot better, and that was just because of the scaling. And that's something that I think it alerts you on the bottom here. When you do your initial unwrap, it says scaling incorrect. It used to do it on 2.79, so I'm always used to looking up there. But it should alert you. If not, if your textures look kind of weird, or just remember to always apply the scaling, just to make sure. So now that we have that, we have rather square and uniform boxes, and we can kind of just take a look and make sure there's no weird. We check the stretching using that, but this is another way you can check stretching. You can always kind of look around and see if anything looks stretched, but we already did that, so we should be good on the stretching aspect. Then you just kind of move things and see, what kind of moves with what, and you can see that this is good because it doesn't, it cuts it on the bottom, so you don't really see it. So kind of see that. That's all one texture. I think we'll say, hey, that's probably good. That's UV unwrapped. It has a fairly good texture size. You can see all these fairly well. Now there will be problems in the future, and I'll kind of show you those as we go. Although actually, we might actually have lucked out and be good. Well, I'll just tell you now then, in case we don't have the problem. Now, with wood grain specifically, they expect wood grain to run in certain directions. And if we have wood grain that runs vertically along this, that's great. But horizontally, that can look incorrect in game. So if it's running horizontally, we might experience that. So when you're UV unwrapping, you might have to consider that, or something we can fix in Painter. So we're going to call this good. UV unwrapped all that. So let's export. Actually, sorry. Let's do Alt-G first. And now you'll notice it goes to the origin point. Now the origin point, let's go to layout. The origin point is up here, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do, because game engines take note of the origin point. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to select Let's just go into face select. Select, 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 select. Then we're going to do, actually I think it's Shift S and then cursor to selected. And then that's going to put the cursor directly in between those 4 points directly on the floor, which is what we're looking for. Then we're going to tab in object mode, and then I don't know the key commands for this in the new one, but we'll do origin, set origin, and we're going to do origin to 3D cursor. Then we're going to hit Alt G again, and now this chair is going to have the origin point right there on the floor, which is always a good idea for game engines, because then if you just drag it out, it'll plop it right there on the floor, directly lined up. You don't have to fiddle around with it anymore. Now, export FBX. And we're going to do chair 2, because I already made one. And then we're going to do selected objects. It's always nice to do that in case you have multiple objects and we have just one selected. So we're going to export FBX. Selected object attribute collection, that's new for this version of Blender. Not, you'd have to create a collection and then make it active, and it would export the entire collection. Scale we're going to leave the same. And technically we could have left all those, but we're just going to do the mesh since we had selected objects. Just going to do the mesh. Otherwise, it might export like an empty cameras, all that sort of thing. And currently, I don't think the forward and the up work. That's for the game engine to know what is forward and what is up. So if the -Z forward and the Y up. So if we go in here, we can see the Z. This is a Z. So technically, we would be Z up and -Y forward. But in my testing, it didn't seem to matter. But so for now, we're just going to do selected objects mesh and then just leave it the way it is. All right, so we'll do chair 2. All right, next part is in Substance Painter. So we'll go ahead and boot that up. While I'm at it, I'm going to start booting up Unreal as well, since we'll be heading to that next. All right, so in Substance, we're going to go to New, and the template is going to be Unreal Engine 4, document resolution. Now, resolution is very important. Obviously, the higher you have this resolution, the nicer your material is going to look, because it's going to have more detail. However, the more detail you have, the more expensive it is for the game engine. For a chair, 1024 is probably even high for a chair, I would say. You might want to actually bump it down to 512. If we had normal maps and baked maps, we do not. For the file, we're just going to select our... I thought I did chair 2 for that. Hold on. Oh, I did it directly in the rooted D drive, of course. All right. Chair 2, there's that. Hit OK. And seconds later, our chair pops in. Now, this is Substance Painter. This is going to be the 3D model view. That is going to be the texture map view. And this is the layer view, but the first thing you need to do is go to texture settings and bake your maps. We don't need an ID map. But this just basically, let's set it to 512, bakes all of your maps. If you had a high poly mesh, you would add it here, which we don't. All right, so that adds all the meshes, or the maps, and that just helps with the materials to determine where there's ambient occlusion, curvature, that sort of thing. Nice thing about Substance Painter, it comes with a bunch of materials, and you can use the Substance Share to download free materials that people have made. But for now, we're looking for wood. And currently we have a wood American cherry. It's not exactly what was in the photo, but we're just going to say that's good there. All I have to do is drag it over to this layer here. And now you'll notice that this is where the UVs come in handy, because you'll notice here there are vertical UVs, which is not the nicest look for, or there's horizontal UVs when you, not the nicest look for a vertical thing. So as well, you notice one of these has UVs going this way, the other one has UVs going this way. And that's something you got to think about, especially for wood grain, when you're UV unwrapping something. But I'll show you how to fix that later, hopefully, if we have time. So that was the bare minimum basics for Substance Painter. And what we can do is, in Unreal, we're going to go to Unreal Engine, Library. We're going to launch. Give us some time. And so Substance Painter is all about layering things on top of each other and masking out what you don't need. So even though our UVs are different for these, what we can do is we can create a white mask, and white means will include. And so currently everything is included, but we can get very particular about what is and is not included. So what we can do is say, let's paint on this. Well, let's not paint. Let's use the easy way. Let's use Polygon Fill. So currently we're going to switch over to the Polygon Fill, and this is, we'll just use Polygon Fill so we can go over to black. We're going to be painting black, which means not included. And that means we're wiping this out from an inclusion. Oops, let's not do that. So that means this is no longer included in our layer. All right, yeah, we'll just leave that for later. So what we can do is then just put another wood American cherry on there. Now this is going to affect everything as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a black mask. And that means we can go and specifically add white to what we only want to use here. So in this, we want this to be affected by it. Now you're wondering, what did this accomplish me? Well, now let's dig into this American cherry fill. So this is a American cherry. What we can do now is go into rotation and go to 90 degrees. Now suddenly we've fixed our UV problem in here without having to go back and redo our UV annoyances that we did. So now the wood grain automatically runs in the right direction, no problem. And we can do the same with a third layer with this if we wanted to. We would just exclude this from the other layers, and then rotate the layer itself so that we would get the UVs running in the right direction. So, and at 512, this is a little rough, but okay. So we're going to do a new project in Unreal, and it's just going to be a third person. Let's do basic project. All right, create the project. So back in, while that's creating, back into Substance. Once we're satisfied with this, and trust me, we've only done the absolute basics of Substance. There's a lot more we could do. We're just going to do export textures, and we're going to, oh, all right, there's a third-party project, or third-person project. So there. All right, share text 2, save. Unreal Engine 4 packed is what you want, and then your texture set, you only have one. Should only have one if you did everything right. And it's 512, 512, yep. and then it will it in the settings it has an occlusion and emissive. Uh, Occlusion, roughness, metallic, and emissive. So when you hit export though, it'll say with some warnings, see logs. Now it's going to say the input map opacity needed by the map, blah, blah, base color is missing. That's because we didn't use opacity. It's also going to tell you emissive was missing. Well, we didn't have any emissive. We didn't need the chair to be emitting light, honestly. So don't worry about those errors. If we go back to Unreal, now we're going to, let's just create a new folder, right-clicking, new folder, say chair, open it up. Now we're going to go back into D drive and grab chair 2. It's going to be a small 25 kilobyte thing. Now for this, these can be rather tricky if you're importing like a skeleton mesh or anything like that, but for the most part you can leave almost all this as normal. We want it to materials, it won't import any materials because we don't have any of those added. I usually like to do those separately. And you'll notice the file access detection. This might cause a problem, and we'll actually fix that in a second. So we hit import. Oh, it actually did work correctly. I don't know why that wasn't working for me yesterday. The chair did import in the correct direction and all that, so I'm happy about that. So this is our model in game, and we can go ahead and show like the simple collision. This is kind of the collision part of the chair. We could do a complex collision, we could do whatever we want, but for the most part we're not going to worry about it. But what we are going to worry about is material. We need a material. And it looks like it imported a material. Man, things are changing. Not sure what that is. Okay, so I bet you I somehow exported materials on FBX. Yep, I did. That's right. I forgot all about that. In Blender, since we had a material added, it was literally just to check the UV mapping. It actually took that material and it extracted it, and that's why we have a material already set up. It's looking at that material from Blender, which usually I don't keep. I usually delete. But either way, we just had to delete that. If we created a material in Blender and exported it, some of that might, as long as it was exported via maps, actual texture maps, that might actually transfer over here correctly. But the first thing we need to do is actually create a folder and just do chair textures, chair text. And we're going to go and find where we exported everything. So here's where I have my export. I have the base color, the normal, and occlusion, roughness, metallic. Don't worry about that. So we're just going to drag and drop those in, and all three of those will import in, and it should automatically recognize one as a texture map. However, this here, the occlusion, roughness, and metallic, we need to open it up and then uncheck sRGB. That's just because we packed the textures, and if you have an sRGB, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't like packed textures. So first things first, let me see if I can, there we go. We have these three textures. We're going to drag and drop them directly onto our material graph and wait for them to kind of load in. And this is going to be our base color, and we can just drag that right off into there, and then it will compile, and you know, say it looks decent there, but we still haven't added the normal map, so we'll drag that to the normal map, and then it will give you an update in a second, and you can see it's looking a little bit more, tiny bit more rough. The next thing is this is actually three of them, so since we packed it, and that allows us to have less textures. Like we could import, you know, 6 textures, but we just packed it all into one. So we're gonna run that into was that metallic? Yeah, occlusion, roughness, metallic. Okay. Well, that's metallic. That's roughness, and that's ambient occlusion there. And so as you can see, it's added a little bit more kind of the ambient occlusion especially is kind of spread out the light just a little bit there. So we can save that. And it'll take a second to save it. If we go to chair 2, oh, it automatically applied it because it already had material 001 from when we exported from Blender. And as you can see, the texture it looks pretty much exactly the same as it would in Substance or anything else. So next is fairly simple. Chair, we take the chair, we plop it in, and then we hit play. And there's our chair in game. As you can see, it is a static chair. It has no physics enabled, and it has collision. And as you can see, the collision is working where I am colliding with the chair. As you see, I mean, it looks sort of like a chair, which is what we're going for. However, let's take a closer look at this, and let's turn off that. What we did here was the most basic, also, by the way, that should be the other direction for grain as well. But what we did here was the absolutely most basic way of modeling that's available. You won't see modeling like this in AAA games unless they have a very specific theme. Yourself, well, why not? Well, the first reason is these edges. There's no edges like this that are this sharp in nature. It just looks unnatural to the eye. It looks like a very basic, flat, rough-hewn sort of thing. And that's where we would, in another tutorial, you would get into high poly versus low poly, bake in a normal map. That would give you the smoothness and the more rounded edges that you want to see in a high quality model. And that's where Substance Painter would really help, because it would be able to bake a great normal map. You can do it in Blender as well. You can bake a great normal map. You can do some more painting in Substance Painter to kind of really bring out the grain, the wood grain. Add some more, varnish irregularities where you could have a high varnish up here, but a low varnish down here, or spots of high and low varnish to kind of make it roughness, or to make it a little uneven. So if we look at kind of our chair there, we could add these spots in here. We could add screw tips very easily, metal screw tips, not a problem. All that could be done in Substance Painter to give it more of a good look. And like I said, this has rounded edges and all that. That's all something we could accomplish with a high poly to low poly mesh, or just with our low poly, we could have rounded out some of these edges as well, or beveled them. Remember, beveling will add to your poly count, which is not ideal, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So those are a few of the options. But this has basically been the extent of, it's 11:21. So this is basically the extent of the class today, guys. So if you have any questions, please let me know now. If not, I mean, if next week, if he's not back, I can maybe do another one if people are interested, and that would go over just a little bit of like the beveling of this. Maybe some more Substance Painter. We would go over creating like a varnish spots and other spots, trying to make it a little bit more unique. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, guys. I think the stream is pretty much over. I'll see you guys in chat.